yet? Oh, they bought them, okay, maybe that was somewhere else, but, so they're planning on getting some full-size lockers this year that'll be a little bit more functional for them, so we're planning on about $3,500 in capital outlay. Department of Public Works, this is the generalized DPW department, so anything that's not specially funded comes out of this department. A lot of their just general office stuff that the director does, things like that. Any fleet maintenance, that kind of stuff, a lot of it comes out of here. So you'll see pretty minimal capital outlay. We're not counting on too much. Sometimes just equipment, or new purchase of equipment, new tools, things like that comes out of here. This is our utilities. You'll notice heat and electric is a significant cost for us, about $30,000 annually. That's something that, you know, I've looked into a couple webinars and things to try to find ways to offset some of these costs, and I've talked to Consumers Energy. They have some programs available, and we'll look into that a little bit this year. It's just, I don't even know how many consumers' bills we get every month for all of our various meters, but there's quite a few, and it's painful to have to initial all those every month. So we'll see if we can work through those a little bit.
Call from 9910-9035.
Environmental control. We've kind of cut down environmental control a little bit to just what's required by our auditors. So you've got waste management, and then we take our spring cleanup day out of here too. And I anticipate that we'll have another successful round of spring cleanup. Planning Commission, they do get paid for meetings now. That was something that, I don't know if it was an oversight before, if it just wasn't enacted before. And then we did, we're looking to fill a spot on there, and I'd like to take them through the planning and zoning training that the rest of the Planning Commission has gone through. A couple members are here tonight, and I think they found it pretty valuable, the Master Citizen Planner class. So hopefully we'll have an opportunity to get somebody trained in there. Parks and Recreation, this is right here, the big one you'll notice is capital outlay. That's listed as our match that we have to have on our books for the grants that we're in for. More than likely, we won't expend too much capital outlay on the park in this fiscal year. It'll more likely be construction season of the following year, which will be our next fiscal year. But that's got to sit on our books to show that we have match available and planned on those grants. And you have other functions. So insurance, we pool our insurance contributions into one line item.
1035.
And then retirement contributions that come out of the general fund as well. We make our annual contribution. We're one for $15,000 contributions to the fire department annually. Our annual dues to the Michigan Municipal League, and then other items come out of here as well. So DDA contributions, we anticipate that we'll have to make some sort of contribution to the DDA. We just ran a preliminary report, and it actually showed them being flat for the year, showing a negative property tax value, which we're going to look into that a little bit more. That seemed kind of off. But then we make an annual contribution to the Mount Calm Economic Alliance for economic development. And then we have our 425 agreement with Dade Township, where we're paying township taxes right there. So you see, when all is said and done, a projected total general fund expenditure for all departments of $733,150, which is right about where we want to be. So, you know, we don't really want, and as of right now, with a month left to go on the books, we're carrying a surplus of $59,309. That will go down because we'll have another month of bills, that kind of thing. We should land pretty close. And this is exactly what we want. So we don't really want to carry big surpluses and big deficits. We want to be pretty close to dollar for dollar. That's, you know, showing that we do a functional budget. So, and a lot of these things are dependent on projects going forward. So if some of these projects don't take place this year, there's a good chance we'll end up having a higher surplus. I try to be pretty conservative with my cost estimates, so I hope we don't have too many cost overruns or anything like that in those capital projects. If anything, I anticipate they'll actually be cheaper than what we're counting on. So, yeah. Moving on, any questions on general fund before I move on to Main Streets? Yes, sir.
I was curious as to what is the liability vehicle insurance and why is it zero?
Yeah, so instead of like separating out the various like insurances which are all through the same pool, liability pool, into separate line items, we totaled our insurance into the insurance line item, which that's actually the way the city used to do it, and it's a little bit easier for the auditor. Basically, the auditor recommended like make things as simple as practical within the Uniform accounts. So some of those things in the last year's budget, like as you can see right here, up top, that used to be zero back in the day. And then you just had a small liability carry, right here, like right here. So it's right there. So I mean, it's something that it's just easier for us to put it all into one line item and pay all of our insurance liability out of there.
And then what is Montcalm School trailer fee?
Our tax.
Yeah, we have to pay a certain, or we have to expend a certain amount of fees to have a zone trailer
We
park.
collect on the trip from the trail park and we pay to the school and the county
Oh,
a portion of that we collect.
And it's, as you can see, it's pretty small under here.
I just
Yeah, what
didn't know
it,
why
yeah, kind of a weird line.
there was a trailer fee for the school.
So, any other questions in general? All right, moving on into major streets. As you guys know, major streets is one of two streets funds that is mandated by the state of Michigan for Act 51 revenues to be, and expenditures to be placed in and out of. We get some of that money through the gas and weight tax that we all pay on our registration and as we get gas. So that's projected with the new legislation to go up slightly this coming year, but really start bearing some fruit for us in the following fiscal years, over the course of 5 years, kind of building it in. So yeah, we anticipate a marginal increase to about $71,000. Again, I think I mentioned during last year's budget, the former road funding as it existed was really maintenance funds. It's not really enough to do much with, except in our case with major streets, we don't have very much mileage for major streets. So we're just, we have a considerable fund balance built up, and we'll get into that a little bit. We anticipate a little bit of interest on CDs and then contributions from major street fund balance, because we are going to try to do some projects this year on Walnut, and I'll get into that a little bit. So with that, our total major street revenue, including the contribution from the fund balance, is going to be projected at $122,000. Construction, we don't really plan on any construction this year, new roads. So you'll see routine maintenance. This is the stuff that the DPW works out of. So some of their salary and wages comes out of here. That can be a lot of different things when it comes to routine maintenance. Resurfacing and maintenance, that's one thing that we're going to be looking at this year. We'll likely contract that out, but that'll be the goal, is to resurface some of those streets. Traffic control, very little comes out of that in a given year. It's just more of a contingency department. Bigger cities spend a lot more on traffic control, obviously. Winter maintenance, again, some of the guys' wages come out of here for different winter-associated tasks of streets. Operating supplies and equipment rental come out of there because we use a lot more equipment in winter for the streets. Administration, we take out that administrative allocation that you saw on the top in the revenues. This is the expenditure line. So that contributions from major streets, that's where this comes out of. And then transfers to local streets. So as I mentioned before, Act 51 allows, if you want to transfer up to 50% of your major streets funds into local streets. They just last state fiscal year, so last October, they changed some of the legislation. They made an amendment when they put through that road funding that you have to pass a resolution to put on your books to do that. So we'll be doing that in our first meeting of the new fiscal year, that we're going to be basically planning on contributing 50% of our annual contribution from the state of Michigan into major streets. We're going to transfer to local streets, and we'll get into why we're going to do that when we go through the PowerPoint a little bit. So that puts our total major streets expenditures at $112,000 with a $9,550 projected surplus. But realistically, we'll probably zero that out because whatever we don't end up needing for these projects from fund balance won't come out of fund balance, so we'll probably end up being a net zero. Same with local streets. We project, a modest increase to around $40,000, somewhere in there. I'm not counting on much because it said it's going to take at least a full year for that legislation to really start generating the revenue that they're saying it's going to generate. So I'm not going to hold our breath on that one. And then contributions to local streets, that's that $35,500 you'll see up here going into that department as a revenue. So essentially doubling the revenue that local streets is going to garner to $76,400 exact style thing. Resurfacing and maintenance, that's that revenue that we're gonna be, or that, some of that expenditure is gonna take place out of local streets, some of it will take place out of general fund for the, improvements to cemetery roads.
So the improvements to the cemetery roads, we wouldn't be doing any construction in that, it's just gonna be improvements.
Yeah, they're not, construction's a department that's designed for new road construction, so if you're gonna be extending your streets, or build, like completely tearing out and rebuilding new, that kind of thing. So really all we're doing is heavy maintenance, so potentially some regrading. For the cemetery, I'm really interested, I've already been speaking to Central Asphalt and Shook Asphalt, as well as the road commission about maybe utilizing, millings, like doing compacted millings instead of actually doing an asphalt overlay, because they hold up, comparably well and they're half the price. And those streets, I mean, they're important streets in our system, but they don't get as heavy traffic as our normal public streets do. So, I project a total project cost for the cemetery portion, at around $30,000. So that's split between the general fund and local streets.
So those streets in the cemetery that could be local streets aren't technically local streets?
They're not right now, which is why that total of $30,000 isn't coming out of local streets, because you can't use local streets money on the ones that aren't on our streets map. So there's a portion of the cemetery roads that are on our streets map, and those are some of the worst portions actually, like the continuation of Walnut in there is in really rough shape. Then we can use local streets money on those because they're on our MDOT streets map. So that 15, that's why I split the project in half between the general fund and the local streets fund. And then I'm gonna try to add them to our local streets map this coming year and see if MDOT will let me do it. They kind of they'll do an on-site inspection and they'll be like, yeah, sure, or nice try, and no.
So does it, if we're trying to say, for purposes of trying to add them to our local streets, if we haven't budgeted for new construction, does that help us in any way?
No, because they're existing. So,
Okay.
like, yeah, if we were to say, and that's the thing, you actually can't, and I'm running into this in Lakeview, you can't budget any expenditure out of your Act 51 funded departments for new construction, but you can't put them on your streets map until they're constructed. So that means you can't get any local major streets money for them until they're constructed and on your map, but you can't put them on your map until you build the street.
So you guys figure out how to.
Yeah,
fund it,
you
basically.
can't use your streets money to build that street.
Gotcha.
You can't then get funded for that street until you build the street. So, go figure. But then again, it's very minor traffic control costs, significantly more winter maintenance costs because we do a lot of plowing, salting, those kinds of things. Then the administrative allocation. So MDOT, I should mention that too. Act 51 allows for a maximum of 10% admin allocation for both departments. So that's why you'll notice each one is 10% of the MDOT allocation. And so that comes to a total expenditure of $37,400 with a surplus of projected at $39,000, which is good because we're trying to build a fund balance in that fund. And you'll see why when we get to that part. DDA, I projected 0 for right now. I anticipate this might change again. There's been, and what you'll notice for this fiscal, these are our contributions from Takes to Montcalm at the time that and then we had paid out about 2,000 of our invoices. So that's just where we were at in space when I was making the budget. But I'm not going to predict anything when it comes to like sponsorships for next year or anything like that. So we're just going to plan on a net 0 for the DDA. We'll see what the TIF capture does, and we'll see what the event does next year. When I made this budget draft, the event hadn't gone off yet. I didn't want to, as hopeful and confident that I was that it would be successful, I didn't want to count on that in our budget document. So we get to our enterprise funds, our sewer funds. We never planned on connection fees, but we did have some this year. Flat rate charges, so these are our fees for usage. We're projecting a 2% increase because, as you guys probably know, due to the bond agreements we've got, our rates are mandated to increase at the rate of inflation every year, or 2%, whichever is higher. So because inflation was essentially flat this year, that mandates a 2% increase, so we'll anticipate the revenue going up to around $214,000 this year. The bond reserve that we're required to withhold, that has to do with our insurance and our debt payments, and then fines and forfeits, interest on CDs. So a total revenue projection of about $233,650. And you'll see right here, we actually had a slight deficit against revenues, but we planned on that with the meter project. So that's why in this fiscal year, you'll actually see it listed as more revenue than next year, but that's because we had some contribution of our fund reserve. And I'll get into that a little bit too. So again, major department for the DPW, obviously a lot of their funds, or a lot of their wages come out of this department, as you'll see right there. You've got a lot of their insurance and stuff paid out of their portions. Administrative allocation, we take, just over 10% usually for administration, because obviously we do a lot of work out of City Hall from the sewer and water system, entering all the reads, sending out all the bills, taking all the payments, that kind of stuff. And then repair and maintenance of the system, we'll count on about $10,000. I'm gonna, for lack of a better term, Jamie and I are gonna do a little digging around in the sewer system this year. There's some, our sewer system in particular is oddly set up in the sense that it's got a septic retrieval system, which you guys know, because we just pay a lot of money to have it pumped. And then that also contributed to our deficit. And then there's also a lack of manholes in some really key areas, so it's kind of tough to get eyes on certain portions of our system. So I put in a little bit of money for repair and maintenance, but not a significant amount. Once we get that asset management plan in place for SAW, we'll anticipate spending some dollars there. So, membership dues, Michigan Rural Water, and a couple other organizations, pumping, sampling. We obviously do our sampling, bring a new offer, effluent sampling. Heat and electric, so you saw what we spent in the general fund. We also have to pay out as water and sewer, so it's another $35,000 in annual energy costs, very high. Equipment rental, so as I explained, when the general fund owns the equipment, but sometimes the sewer fund has to rent the equipment. Miscellaneous expenditures, just things that come up in the system, things that the guys have to pick up throughout the course of the year. That fluctuates depending on what happens throughout the year, so we try to plan some contingency there. Not planning on any express capital outlay so like main replacement and stuff this year. Really, I want to see what happens with that SAW grant project, because I think that's really going to uncover a lot of, it's going to open a can of worms, so to speak. So we'll plan on that in forthcoming fiscal years. These are our bond payments. So we make principal payment right here. You have to pay that bond reserve. That's listed as a revenue on top, and it even balances out right here. But this is our principal payment on our sewer bonds, and then our interest payment on our sewer bonds. You'll notice the amortization is going to go up quite a bit. So our total expenditures will be $212,350 with a projected revenue surplus of $21,300. And then you'll notice this year we've netted basically because we ran at a deficit, so we contributed the necessary fund balance to cover that deficit, and then that'll zero out the year. And then we'll make those budget amendments after we close this fiscal with our last bank deficit.
What is depreciation not figured in?
Depreciation expense, that's completed in our audit, which I could have gotten these figures from the previous fiscal year and I just forgot. That was just oversight on my part.
But won't that,
That will affect the final outcome.
that's what I was doing.
Yep, yeah, it will. But that usually factored, our net position will usually change in the financial statements a little bit, reflecting those, but it doesn't usually affect the cash on hand too drastically. And I can,
Well, but before it was 73,000.
yeah, and I think that the depreciation expense was like considerable right here, I think because of the large projects that you guys did, but I don't know that to a certainty. So I'll find out what these figures were, because I'm curious about them too, and they should be in our financial statements. I've seen them, I just don't know them offhand. I don't suppose you know them offhand, do you? So yeah, that will factor into this final, but we don't get that done until we do our year-end audit. So I don't have what this year's depreciation will be yet.
Yeah.
Transfer that all the way over. So moving on to the water fund. Revenues, again, we don't count on turn on or turn off fees. Flat rate charges, again, a 2% increase. We anticipate they'll go up to around $223,000 this year. Again, the same bond reserve. Fines and forfeits, those happen every year to a certain degree. Interest on CDs, miscellaneous revenues, so we're going to sit at a total of around $247,630 in projected revenue. Then you get into expenditures. So again, you guys spend a lot of their time working in the water sewer departments, so a lot of their funding comes from there. A lot of the same stuff here. So you'll see the admin allocation that will translate to a line item in the general fund revenues right up there. Repair and maintenance, we like to plan on contingencies for that too. We'll get a certain amount of breaks, we'll get a certain amount of equipment breakdown. Professional services, you know, we usually have one thing or another where we want to call in somebody to help us out with it. So, sampling again, done by Green New Hub. It's been a long-standing arrangement, if I'm not mistaken. Training and conferences. We like to budget just a little bit in. Charlie is going to be working on his water certification. So what that does is Jamie has both his water and sewer certification, and he's considered the operator in charge for our systems. You have, if you run a public water sewer system, you have to have a listed operator in charge of DEQ. What that'll do is, and if there's any kind of breaker, then you're supposed to have an operator on site. So if we get Dan with sewer and Charlie with water, that way if Jamie's out of town or something, he can like rest a little bit easier on vacation, knowing if there is a break, we can still cover our bases for both water and sewer if there's a problem, and have an operator in charge on site. So that's, and Charlie's taken several classes, and he's quite confident. I think this coming year is going to be his year. And then just some expenses here this year, part of the telephone costs. Another heating and electric, they pay less because they don't have as, like the lift stations are really the big cost for the sewer. Equipment rental, and some random miscellaneous expenses that come up throughout the year. Capital outlay, again, you know, counting on something, kind of digging around a little bit and seeing what's going on. The water payments, as you guys know, water total cost for that large project, it's constituted a larger portion of the project, so you'll notice the principal payments higher, the interest payments are higher. So before, as Carl was right to point out, before depreciation expense, you're looking at $223,000 in expenditure, so roughly $25,000 surplus. And when it comes to net position on paper, depreciation will likely eat up a good chunk of that. So total budget position, total revenue of all funds is $1,415,948. Total projected expenditure of all funds, $1,318,350. We are contributing some fund balance to things which bump those revenues up. So we have a projected net of all funds surplus of $97,598. A lot of that is the roads funds, trying to build a fund balance in local streets, and then having some conservative revenue projections for contribution from fund balance to cover some of these projects we're going to get into. So, you know, in short, budget's in a healthy place. Despite the bills coming up, we may have to balance some individual departments, but the total budget is going to be okay after this coming bank crack. So
989769035.
if you had to take that, Ken, if it's something to do with the company. But yeah, so I think that's something that you know, is important to remember, because obviously you guys are out in the community and people are going to come and have questions. One thing to remind people of is that we have an open door policy here. The budget is public knowledge or public purview. It has to be. And you know, someone just looking at the spreadsheet, it's kind of exhausting, and like, you know, it might be kind of intimidating for an average person that doesn't want to necessarily deal with all this. I'd be happy to sit down and walk through any of it, because I think a lot of times people, you know, they pay their taxes and they wonder where their money's going, and it's important to understand that stuff. So, but the long and short of it is the budget's in a good spot, and now we'll get a little bit into what we kind of want to get done this year. So any questions on the actual figures?
I really would ask you to look into the depreciation expense, because it seems to be quite large in comparison to the surplus that are projected.
Yeah, and I think it'll even things out just a touch. And I think the depreciation expense too is like a net position figure. So it's gonna, obviously our net positions for our enterprise funds, if you actually look at our financial statements, they're somewhere to the tune of like, I don't know, like $3.1 million, because it adds to the total value of your capital assets and things like that. So that depreciation expense depreciates a lot of your equipment, and like based on those Schedule C rates and things like that, which is why the general fund, partially why the general fund gets paid. So yeah, it is important to remember that on the operating spreadsheet, then yeah, it's going to take that net position down some. But when it comes to actual expenditures and cash on hand, it's not a one-to-one transfer. So, but I will look into it, because I should have added it for the previous fiscal year, and that was an oversight, so I apologize for that. And I'll make a note of it on my next report, just so you guys can see it and see where we're at. So yeah, getting into sort of our proposed budget overview. You know, summary of the changes to the process and the format. I kind of want to talk about this a little bit. what we'll be getting into really is an overview of our funding, any significant net changes in fund balance, and then kind of the stuff we got done in this fiscal year, and then some themes for the next fiscal year, and some projects, and then some key figures from the budget that we just looked over, and kind of summarize that a little bit. So again, interrupt me with questions as we go forward. So this is an overview of our funding, so actually cash on hand. So at these green figures are pluses or minuses from last year at this time. So the total general fund right now, CDs cash on hand is sitting at $732,617.39 as of the end of May. That's just a slight increase from where we were during the last budget presentation by about just under $5,000. So to put that in perspective, that's as part of general fund budget, the fund reserve is 99.99%. So that means if the city were to lose all revenue completely, any revenue that comes into the general fund, it could sustain itself for a year on paper, realistically more than a year, because a lot of those revenues are projections from other departments. So that's high, that's extremely high, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Total in major streets, again, extremely high, and we actually added fund balance to it again this year by quite a margin. So we're sitting at $727,254.25 in major streets, and that's honestly because we just don't have very much major street mileage in the city. I think it's like 2.31 or 2.71 miles of our total 12 point some odd miles. So it's just a minority of our streets. Most of our streets are designated local by MDOT. Because we have M66, we don't take care of it. The state highway is taken care of by the road commission. So over the course of years, you replace these roads and they last for 25 years with a little bit of maintenance, and we keep getting these road funds for them, and it's actually really, really difficult once they're in your major streets account to transition them out of the major streets account. Nearly impossible. I've been working with MDOT a little bit, and I anticipate I'm going to work with them a lot more to see if we can do something about that. Because that's really, and that's unfortunate, and it's a problem with our legislation, our Act 51 legislation. I mean, think about how many other small communities just don't have that many major streets, so they've just been banking this fund balance. How many millions and millions of taxpayer dollars are sitting on the books across the state, and it's really difficult for these communities to find projects to use it. So that's something that I think is an issue. Local streets, you'll see we're up just a touch in local streets, 137, 250. Hopefully that goes up by another 40,000. So that's really that's the fund. If these two funds could trade places, that would be great, because that's what most of our streets are, is local streets. And over the course of time, we want to make sure that we're doing preventative maintenance and where necessary, complete overlays like we did last year to make sure that we're going to minimize breakdown, because that funding metric is much lower. They don't give you nearly as much per foot for local streets. Downtown Development Authority, that's obviously up from last year because we just barely had one last year, and those funds have been accounted for in